Refreshing and stimulating talk. Power 98.7. Now we're talking.
All right, let's move it on then. Time to turn our attention to a different matter altogether. It's just a story that broke, a week or two, last week actually. It emerged that a Section 59 inquiry revealed that South Africa's top medical aid schemes, Discovery, GEMS, and MedScheme, were found to have unfairly targeted black healthcare providers under the guise of fraud detection. The panel, which conducted the investigation, was led by Advocate Tembeka Ngcukaitobi, found that the schemes, algorithms, and procedures were racially discriminatory, with black doctors up to 650% more likely to face sanctions. The independent investigative panel was appointed by the Council for Medical Schemes in 2019 to probe allegations that black healthcare providers were being treated unfairly by medical schemes based on race. Medical aid schemes and the Board of Healthcare Funders have rejected the damning findings from this inquiry, but the health professional groups say it confirms the experiences of many black practitioners. Right, let's now speak to shed more light on this matter, and I'm joined on the line by the Deputy Director General, Health Regulation and Compliance in the Department of Health, the National Department of Health, Dr. Anban Pillay. Good evening to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening to you, and good evening to your listeners and to Mr. Naidu.
Yes, indeed. Let's also welcome Mr. Naidu, who's also joining us, Mr. Torisha Naidu from the Funders Association. Good evening, and thank you, and welcome as well to Power Perspective.
Good evening, and thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me on your show. And Anban, great to see you again.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's start with you then, Dr. Pillay. Just in terms of, just to help us understand what this Section 59 inquiry, what exactly is a Section 59 inquiry?
Thank you very much for the question. So the Section 59 is a section within the Medical Schemes Act, and it basically makes provision for medical schemes to recover funds from providers of healthcare who have received funds that may not necessarily be due to them. And the Act allows schemes then to apply measures that would allow them to recoup those funds. The difficulty, I guess, with the Section 59 in its current form, and I think that's what the panel was critical of as well, is that it doesn't lay out any detail of how that recovery needs to happen once it's determined that a particular provider has been paid more than is due to them. And I think that's the issue that we would need to deal with going forward from here.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
So then, in terms of this inquiry, apparently it was meant to look at, obviously this had been based on complaints that had been received that black healthcare providers, are being unfairly targeted, for, sanction and for investigations and all of that. Maybe it might be, I don't know whether you are in a position actually to tell us about how let me just put it out there, by the way, that we did try to get Advocate Ngcukaitobi to speak to us. Unfortunately, we were unsuccessful there. Just to try and explain how they went about their work. I mean, you receive all these complaints. What was the method? Because I see a lot of those that are pushing back against this, the medical aid schemes, saying that this was not a scientific investigation that was done, that there's a lot of assumptions that were made and all of that. So it was interesting to understand how they went about making the determination that indeed there was some kind of bias against the black professionals.
Yeah, from what we can understand from the report and what the panel shared with us. They received submissions from parties that were aggrieved by the conduct of medical schemes, and they presented their evidence to the panel. The panel then also engaged medical schemes, and I understand that they requested a lot of data from medical schemes around the type of practitioners that were identified for having been involved in this type of conduct in the view of schemes. And I think the panel then acquired the services of statisticians or a statistician to look through the data to try to understand as to whether the probability of a Black practitioner being identified relative to other practitioners, what was the likelihood? And that's where some of those statistics come from. Basically, the view of the panel was that it's more likely that a Black practitioner was going to be identified as opposed to a white practitioner as such. Yeah.
I suppose one other bit of data that would be helpful is that in those cases where health practitioners have been identified for investigation or all of that, in those cases, how many of them were actually substantiated and upheld, where there was some kind of a fraud or whatever detected, and that was investigated, and subsequently some type of a sanction happened? Because I think that would also be quite an important bit of information. Because the thing is that if people are being unfairly targeted, then you would imagine that the majority of cases that are brought against Black, health practitioners would be unsubstantiated.
So it seems from what the panel had shared with us is that and the way this process operates as well is problematic. So there's the identification part of a Black practitioner, but thereafter the panel was also very concerned from a process perspective. One would anticipate that when you identify a practitioner who may have breached some of the rules in terms of claiming, that you then have an independent process to determine whether your allegations can be substantiated with an independent person. But what seems to have happened in all the cases that are reported is that those that are making the allegations are also the one then determining the sanction. So in other words, what practitioners were saying is that they would be called into a meeting and presented with the allegations and basically told, if you don't accept them, we will then cut all payment agreements with you, which meant that those practitioners would have to ask their patients to pay cash, and in the private environment, that would basically be catastrophic for a private provider. And so that is also problematic, and the panel had made some recommendations of a more independent process that allows for an adjudication of indeed whether this practitioner has breached some of the claiming requirements and to what extent that happened and what needs to happen next, etc. So in the absence of all that, it appears that the way the process currently happens is that those investigating also determine what the sanction is going to be. And apparently this can go back up to 3 years, which is quite a significant period. I'm not sure if practitioners have any evidence to defend themselves, 3 years back, and whether they have all the records in terms of claims, etc. So I think that's another challenge, yeah.
Let's bring in Tanisha Naidu as well from the Funders Association, who's joining us as well, the Chief Executive Officer of the Health Funders Association. Perhaps maybe what I should do with you, Mr. Naidu, if we can start maybe just by understanding exactly who's who in the zoo in terms of all these associations. So you with the Health Funders Association, and I also mentioned in my introduction a little earlier about the board of healthcare funders as well. How many different? Yeah, tell us about what your organization. How all of you are linked up as well.
Sure. So thank you. So my name is Dinesh Naidu. So the Health Funders Association was started in 2015, so just roughly 10 years. The HFA, short, we actually a body that represents 20 medical schemes and 3 administrators. And roughly, so it's about 4.1 million lives and roughly 46% of the beneficiaries of medical schemes we represent. So I think just for completeness, there is another body which is called the Board of Healthcare Funders, and they're roughly as well, around 40% of the market, so represent medical schemes. So we represent the interests of medical schemes, private healthcare.
Right. Okay. Now, from your side of things, as medical schemes, let's understand these investigations that are undertaken that have brought us to where we are, that led to this inquiry. What are the sort of investigations that will be done into health practitioners, and what would prompt such an investigation?
Sure. So thank you. So firstly, I think, let me start off by making something quite clear. And I think that unfortunately, there's been a lot of misrepresentation in the media, regarding what's been said in the report. And unfortunately, people have used it for their own needs. But it must be clear, medical schemes have not been found guilty of unfair discrimination or racial profiling. There were no legal findings of unfair discrimination in the report. Okay, and I think we need to make it clear. In fact, the report actually said we decided, in their words, we decided not to make any legal findings about unfair discrimination. It's in black and white, written in the report. Okay, now with that cleared, let me start from as a starting point, right? Maybe just explain this. So medical schemes actually, when they receive a claim, they don't know what race you are. They receive simply a number, right? And as a health practitioner, and they use that number, check if it's a valid a practitioner number, and then they check the claim, and if everything, they work on a trust basis. So within receiving, a claim, we meant to be paying within 30 days. And roughly, to give you an idea, each and every day, about 800 million rand of claims are paid. So, and a large majority of that is actually paid without any issues. Now let's actually talk about how we actually get to fraud-based interviews. So, just as an example, right, for every 100 healthcare practitioners, right, 90 healthcare practitioners, no issues, no problems, paid without any concern. Then you're left with, the 10 healthcare practitioners. Now, of those 10 healthcare practitioners, particularly with fraud, waste, and abuse, 8 of those 10 are flagged by tip-offs. So it'll be, for example, another patient or a patient looking at his statement and saying, hey, something doesn't look right in my billing here, right? And then they'll give a tip-off and say, just please look at it, right? There's something wrong. So 8 of those 10 are actually flagged by people, right? And then an investigation happens. 2 of the 10, the other 2 of the 10 is actually flagged by an algorithm, and there is no case indicator in that. And I need to maybe just give an understanding, right? So that's how we get the 10. But fraud, waste, and abuse is a big bucket. It's broad words. So the difference between fraud and is malicious fraud. For example, the pharmacist dispenses or submits claims for medicines, but he actually dispenses nappies. Now that is pure fraud, right? You're dispensing nappies, but you're actually claiming for them. So that's malicious intent. And then you also do have on the other spectrum, which is, just errors. So for example, in maybe in a surgery or something, you typing a number and you type, for example, 11 liters of oxygen or blood or something, right? But it's actually meant to be 1 liter. It's just that maybe the number was sticky, right? So now that's error, right? So there's a broad spectrum of this. A majority of the cases, they're kind of like errors, like understandable errors. But there are some malicious things. And I put it to you, think about it, right? You're a member, you're paying for your medical aid scheme. If you now actually know that your money was actually paid for something you never received, would you be comfortable to write it off, or would you actually want it to be recovered? And I think most people will say, if you paid for a service you never received, you'd want to be able to recover it. You want to be able to make sure you get your money back. And that is actually what medical schemes are there for. They are there, firstly, to protect the interests of members, and that's where Section 59 comes in. Where there's the fraudulent activities, we must have a mechanism to be able to recover that. Because on average, right, every international estimates are saying that somewhere between 7 and 15 rand out of every 100 rand that you pay is towards fraud. So that's 7 to 15% of claims. And that's a huge number, right? And if we don't recover that, what actually happens, because medical schemes are not for profit, it increases healthcare inflation by a few percentage. So members become paying, for that fraud, waste, and abuse. It then becomes more and more unaffordable every year. So fraud is a problem. It's not a South African problem, it's a global problem. And in that respect, there has to be mechanisms placed to protect members' funds. And at the same point, there must be fairness to all individual parties, given the opportunity, to explain if there's issues and so on.
So when
Said a lot, so maybe pause.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. When actual acts of fraud are uncovered through your investigation and all of that, what actually then is the sanction that goes with that? Because fraud is, in essence, I mean, the examples that you gave, this is a criminal offense. If you are misrepresenting facts and all of that, and then as a result of that misrepresentation, there's financial gain to you. That is a criminal offense. But how do you then address it from your side once you have detected? What is the process that then unfolds? So, I mean, and due process as well in terms of giving the person who stands accused of this fraud to make representations and defend themselves and so on.
Yeah, so I think so this is typically what happens, right? If there's something that's been flagged, right, and that is potentially fraudulent, there'd be an investigation. You need to be able to confirm the results, etc. Then you kind of inform the person involved, and give them an opportunity to explain. So typically, that could be done, depending. Each scheme is different. Each scheme has different processes, and I think that's one of the things we need to standardize and get to something there. But so in broad strokes, this could happen particularly in a neutral environment, sometimes with an arbitrator, in general terms, and then it is presented to them in like, what would you say as as provider, do you accept these things? Do you believe there's another reason for it? And an opportunity is accorded to the provider to provide their reasons for whatever it is. If it is genuine, legitimate reasons, then there's no reason to proceed any further. If there is a point of contention, like okay, you really did dispense nappies, but we need it. Then for me, that's the point of where we actually need to say, look, what are you going to do? And this is a negotiation engagement. And if there was properly funds that was fraudulent, options are, firstly, there's a PRECA requirement. I can't remember what PRECA stands for, but it is for, you've got to report them to the police, basically, because it's a criminal case, etc. When it gets to a certain level. But then the other thing is sit down and say, how are you going to pay back the money? Now, some schemes actually say, we will make this a fair process. We'll offer it to you, repay over X years, interest-free, right? So it's trying not to because at the end of the day, they're still healthcare practitioners. They're still an integral part of things. It's not to say, shut them off entirely. And then there's different methods approach. If the person is totally, unwilling and uncooperative, etc., then we need to look at other ways and means of engaging. We obviously have to protect the members. So the one extreme, is if this person is purely fraud, and we've picked it up, then you simply say, and you inform the members, we cannot accept any money from this practitioner, or we cannot pay this practitioner at all because he's, call it convicted of fraud or whatever the case may be. It's in the best interest of members. So those are some of the extreme side. But there is, some schemes have a rehabilitation program to enable practitioners, to rehabilitate. Sometimes they go off direct payment arrangements. But if you rehabilitate, and there's steps and processes and protocols, you can be rehabilitated, put back onto direct payment arrangements.
This is the Power Perspective on Power 98.7. We're talking about the recent findings, or the findings of a Section 59 inquiry that investigated allegations that black healthcare providers are facing undue, are being unduly targeted for investigations of fraud, and then also subsequently sanctioned. That this report found that up to 6 black doctors, black being generically used here to include all practitioners that are not white. So it was found that 600 that black doctors are up to 650% more likely to face sanctions. And I'd like to invite you, if you are a medical practitioner, to please to share your experiences with dealing with medical schemes, and whether you have indeed found yourself in a situation where you felt you were unfairly targeted. Now, coming back to you, Dr. Pillay, for their part, medical schemes are saying that this finding, of course, they've rejected the findings of the inquiry, and are saying that, this will actually have the effect of setting back the fight against corruption, because they maintain that, these investigations happen because they need to fight, fraud and corruption, which, as Thonish Naidu just told us, it's a big problem. Fraud is and it's not a uniquely South African problem, but it's a worldwide problem in this space.
Yeah, I think if we look at the report, it's clear that the panel certainly supports the view that there needs to be a strong fight against fraud, waste, and abuse, and there must be measures in place to protect medical schemes against it, because ultimately this has a huge financial implication on the members of schemes, who would then have to pay higher premiums because of claims that are not legitimate. So I think we're all in agreement with that. There's no disagreement about that. The issue comes in when the mechanisms by which schemes have applied, as the panel finds it, in the algorithms to identify persons who may be practicing in a manner that's questionable. And I think one of the difficulties that the panel had is that the parameters that were being used in the algorithm were not transparent. And so one of the things they've recommended to us is that the department and the Council for Medical Schemes, at least, should have full sight of those parameters so that they are fair and they're not in any way targeting a particular group, but rather targeting the abuse of medical scheme finances through excessive billing, etc. And I think we're all on the same page on that. So I think that's the first thing, and I think we will certainly support that. I think secondly, we need to progress along the issue of once you identify such a practitioner who is transgressing the billing rules, what process should be in place so that he or she has a fair chance to explain his position as to why billing happened in the way that it did. And some independent arbitrator can then make a determination about whether there was abuse or not, and then subsequently what sanctions should there be. Not to make it an onerous judicial process that's very expensive as well, but a process that's fair for the practitioner. I think many of the practitioners that I understood from the report were quite intimidated by the process that they were presented with, and so didn't have an opportunity to fully apply their mind. So one would want to make sure that that process is fair at the end of the day, and allows practitioners an opportunity to explain their position before a decision is made about whether there's been abuse or not and what the sanction should be. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, either one of you can answer this one. In the case where there have been investigations that were done, I think I did ask in a slightly different way the same question, but I'm trying to get the sense of, like, you've said that it's widespread. You, Tonish and Naidu, you said that fraud is a problem. It's a widespread problem. Of the cases that I investigated, are you able to give us, I don't know, an idea, a ballpark figure of those cases where fraud indeed was, it was found that there was some fraudulent activity, where whatever complaint was made was actually upheld? Can you give us like a ballpark figure?
Yeah, so I mean, you don't need to look further than actually some of the complainants who raised this for racial profiling to be investigated were actually people. So examples, right? I mean, an optometrist submitted false claims to medical schemes for R1 million, right?
Sure.
And what they actually did was paid cap to the members and dispensed sunglasses. Not reading specs, but sunglasses, branded sunglasses, and paid a part of that cash to the member. So that's fraud, right? You're not supposed to be using it. Another one would be, for example, an orthopedic surgeon who repeatedly submitted claims for services that were not rendered. And that was millions of rands, right? That was submitted. Psychologists, right? I mean, it's something we've picked up. But typically, for example, we've seen a repeated number of claims where the consult hours are 90 minutes, right? But actually, when you investigate and ask, it was actually only 60 minutes. So now that's extra billing, inflating claims. So these are actually real life things. And we've seen, card farming is another example. I think there was a recent case that made media, from Shems, where I think there were two daughters. And the one daughter was extremely sick, but only one daughter had medical aid and wasn't the one actually. So the mother took one daughter to the hospital, admitted her. The daughter didn't have medical aid, died actually. And then when they died, she had to fill in who the name was. And at that point, they realized it wasn't actually the one that was on the medical aid card. It was actually the other one. And that's pure fraud, right? And it was actually a heartbreaking thing because it's such only one daughter had medical aid. The other daughter who needed medical aid didn't have it, but needed healthcare services, and the mum had to do a fraudulent activity to bring. So there are these cases that happen, and some of these are like the high end of profile stuff that we see, as well as quite often we see, for example, medications. We see what do you call it? The original brand, the more expensive brands. Call it brands,
the generics versus the original.
Yeah. And the price difference could be something like 90%. So you dispense the generic, but you pay for the 90% more expensive. So you see a lot of those type of fraud perpetrating. In fact, there's even examples where it's gotten so sophisticated. In some instances, you've got organized crime where you actually, when you leave a medical aid scheme, and I've seen this with some personal experience, if you leave a medical aid scheme, you have a medical balance, right? A savings account balance,
right,
which could accumulate to thousands of rands. Now, when you actually leave, you're entitled to that, right? When you leave that medical aid scheme, you're entitled because it's your personal money. What typically happens is the organized crimes have elevated to such an extent where they know who's left, when they've left, and open false bank accounts, and then be able to actually go and ask for withdrawal of that money into that false bank account. And that level of sophistication is now at a level that you've got to be able to produce IDs, you've got to be able to know the balance amounts, you need to be able to convince banks. So there is all of this.
Those are great examples that you've given us, in terms of the types of cases that are investigated. So of those that you've just mentioned, I suppose the ones that you've mentioned are the ones that were actually substantiated, where it was actually the complaints were upheld. So what I'm trying to get a sense of here is, for every 100 cases that are reported to you, what percentage actually result in whatever cases where a finding of guilt or whatever, however it is termed, because then only can we start talking about whether this is unfair. I mean, I'm trying to see how we get to a figure where black doctors are 650% more likely to be investigated and found guilty. So of those of the cases that you have given us, let's use 100. How many of those 100 are actually found to have been, indeed, there is a case here to answer for fraud or abuse or...
Unfortunately, I don't have that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't have that statistic at hand to be able to quote. So, because it's so sensitive, I wouldn't want to try and guesstimate, that number. Sure. But I think even if we talk about that number now, I will kind of just mention briefly, some of the issues, and I'll try to make this in simplistic terms because I'm not a statistician, right?
Yeah.
So I'll try to make it simple. What the schemes do not know the race of doctors. I don't even think HPCSA actually knows it, right? What schemes receive is a number. Now, the exercise that was undertaken was firstly to look at surnames and use surnames to classify based on race. Now, a couple of issues that have happened along the way. Firstly, that's not accounted for is incorporated practice, corporate practices, right? I think were classified either incorrectly classified. I think all corporate practices, if you're a doctor in law, then you were classified as white, right? But firstly, so that's a wrong classification. And then secondly, doctor in law were incorporated, right, as many practitioners under it. So there's a couple of issues. But I can tell you, from a personal thing, my sister-in-law is a anaesthetist. She is white. Her surname, is Naidu. So is that a white or a black practitioner? So you've got all these things. But let's say, for example, Jacobs or Jacobs, is that a white or a black practitioner? You cannot concretely tell if you're a white or black practitioner unless you actually phone each and every single person and verify. Or but just doing an estimate through an Excel sheet or classification by name is inaccurate. So I think that's actually where one of the shortcomings are from this. Plus, there's apparently a lot of more technical things called confounding factors, which I'm not the expert to be able to explain, but apparently that has an impact on the results. I don't know if Dr. Pillay knows more about this.
Let's bring you in here as well, Dr. Pillay, and just to get a sense from your side. I mean, what Mthonishe Naidu has just mentioned now, it may seem like this is a big thing, surely. This goes to the heart of what the findings of this report, and I think this is why those medical schemes that are pushing back are also complaining about this, that there were too many assumptions that were made in collecting this, such as if you come across a medical practice that is named Flora, Medical Center, and then that immediately assume that that's a white practice, So let me get your take on that, and also just to try and understand from your side as a department, like what you would consider, because you are going to have to consider this report and make, I suppose, decide how to take things forward or how you remedy the situation. So how do we define what is an unfair, when we say people are being unfairly targeted, what exactly we are talking about here?
Yeah, I think, look, it would be very difficult to go back into the past and try and understand exactly whether those practitioners that were identified were targeted or whether that was just the practitioners that were found through the system to have been billing excessively and being involved in fraud, waste, or abuse. That said, I think there definitely is a need for some standardization and regulation of the process by which this work is being done. And so the panel recommends that, and I think despite what they may or may not say about race, there needs to be some standardization, transparency at a particular level in order for everyone to be comfortable that those that were identified are not being unfairly targeted. I think the second thing is certainly there needs to be a process by which the engagement with the practitioners happen, evidence being presented, and the basis on which determinations are made as to whether there's been fraud, waste, or abuse, and then clearly the sanction thereafter. So I think those things are corrective measures that we take out of the report. As to whether statistically, it's correct, the numbers are put out around Black practitioners, etc. I guess, statisticians can debate that. But it won't take us any further if we don't correct this current situation of how we actually identify people, and then what do we do with them once we've identified them. Yeah.
This is a Power Perspective, talking about a report of a Section 59 inquiry that looked into certain practices which found racial disparities in medical aid fraud detection, and that as high as 650%. That was the percentage of doctors or Black doctors. It was said that they were up to 650% more likely to face sanctions. We'll wrap up with my guest after this.
Power Perspective, 8 p.m. to midnight.
All right, so let's conclude our discussion then this evening with my two guests, Dr. Anben Pillay, who is the Deputy Director General for Health Regulation and Compliance at the National Department of Health, and also with us the CEO of the Funders Association, that is the Health Funders Association, to give it the full name, that is Tonashin Naidu. Okay, gentlemen, so where do we go next? Let's start with you, Dr. Pillay. Firstly, maybe in your response, you will also cover what this report and this inquiry, because they don't have any powers to make any changes to legislation or that sort of thing. They can make recommendations and all of that. But from your side as government, when you are in receipt of this report, how do you treat it? What's the way forward?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to engage with the interested parties, particularly those that would be affected by the report, practitioners as well as schemes, and obviously the patients that are the beneficiaries of medical scheme arrangements, and just get their views on how they suggest we take this forward. We do have some views on what we should be doing. The regulator for this is the Council for Medical Schemes.
That's
so I
right.
think they will make the first move in terms of that engagement, both with schemes as well as with practitioners. And thereafter, we will be looking to some legislative amendments that would then formalize that in terms of legislation and set up a process clearly that would then regularize this in terms of some requirement under the Medical Schemes Act. But we'd like to consult with everybody and hear everybody out in terms of this report, given that parties may not have had an opportunity to reflect all their views about what they thought of the report and what should or shouldn't be implemented. Yeah.
From your side, Tonashin Naidu, what would you like to see happen next in terms of dealing with this report?
Yeah, so firstly, I must say, it's been a whirlwind of 2 weeks, and I felt like I was always defending something, and it was refreshing to hear some positive stuff from Anbad, because I think what we need to do is really build for the future. And for us, it's been a long time since this report has finished, but there's a lot of good things, and I can talk about stuff that doesn't necessarily require legislation. So it's like an industry charter, that we've been working on to talk about how we ensure fairness, transparency, procedural safeguards, a new standard operating procedure regarding, recovery of member funds, and then a code of good practice for the industry as well. And then quite importantly, this is where we want to try and standardize processes across all medical schemes. And this is establish something called a tribunal, a fraud, waste, and abuse tribunal, possibly an independently chaired. Everyone has equal opportunity. It's like it must be cost efficient. Where healthcare providers can come, members can come, and a decision that's abiding. And I think that is what we're all asking for and requiring. Let us not use this report to divide us. Let us actually use this report to come closer and find a better way. At the end of the day, we're in healthcare, and we want to make sure members' money is protected, and we deliver the best healthcare out there.
I mean, in the way things currently are, is there a recourse for a health practitioner who feels they were, unfairly targeted, or they were not happy with the sanction meted out to them? Is there some kind of an appeal process in the way as things currently stand? You've just mentioned the tribunal. How do things currently work? Are there people that are even kicked out on a permanent basis?
So, I mean, healthcare is multi-regulated. So you've got HPCS, you've got CMS, etc. So CMS looks after medical schemes. Now, if you've got a complaint against medical schemes, right? So the process is firstly, you start, at the lowest level, engage with the scheme, raise a complaint. If you're not getting joy there, then, there are legislative processes in the Medical Schemes Act to follow. So you can go directly to the Council for Medical Schemes, and raise complaints or in that regard. So there is currently, a process enshrined in the Medical Schemes Act. However, and I think we all acknowledge, Medical Schemes Act has not been updated from 2003 or somewhere around there, 1998. So, there's opportunity to improve it, and opportunity to incorporate some of these things. Yeah. So, and that I think is what we need to work on.
And Dr. Pillay, I do wonder whether there hasn't been any serious damage. I mean, the extent of which the jury can be out on what extent of that damage is. But I would imagine there's a serious reputational damage to the schemes that have been singled out here, Discovery, Gems, and MedScheme, who potentially, because the way it's being interpreted by the media, and therefore the public will take it in, is that these are racist companies. I mean, that's essentially the message that is out there. I mean, if I'm a member of any one of these schemes, I'm reconsidering my membership.
Yeah, I think there is a significant reputational damage for schemes. I do think that...
which is why there will be this fight back, I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah. So if I was sitting in the shoes of any of those schemes, I would probably want to be very transparent about the process that I follow and explain that fully, particularly to practitioners and members, so that people understand the process that's followed. Because I think simply saying, well, we're not racist is usually not helpful. It's the devil's in the detail, and I think that's what the report's trying to say. So I think that would probably be a better way to clarify things. Yeah.
Because my concern, as Tonisha was saying, that actually the report doesn't make a finding of racism or bias against any of these. They just looked at these probabilities. But, perception, as they say, is 90% reality. And this could be extremely harmful for these organizations. But our time is up, gentlemen. This is a much longer discussion than I even imagined. There's a lot of layers to it. But I want to thank you both for your time and your insights. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Much appreciate Tonisha Naidu as well.
Thank you very much.
Tonisha Naidu is with the Health Funders Association. He's the CEO, and Dr. Anbad Pillay is DDG with the National Department of Health. He's in charge of health regulation and compliance.